Welcome to the Thirst for More podcast. I'm your host, Brandon Smitley, and today we're going to dive deep into something I'm pretty passionate about thanks to the lovely social media. So, really quickly, if you're not following me, give me a follow over on Instagram at bsmitley, where you can find all these lovely, intriguing things. And as always, if you're listening on Apple, iTunes, Spotify, through the podcast, I really appreciate it. Also, remember you can check me out over on YouTube. And if you're on YouTube, if you happen to be on the go, you can check it out on one of your favorite streaming devices as well. Today, we're diving into one of the fitness field, most controversial exercises. We're going to explore the shocking research that's making experts question everything we thought we knew about burpees. And trust me, by the end of this episode, you'll never look at this exercise the same way again. If you know me, you know I hate the burpee. I've called it useless. I've called it pointless. I think there's no need, rhyme, or reason that any training program should have a burpee in it. And I've even been quoted as saying burpees are what people do when they're lazy and they don't know what to do. Okay. And by that, what I mean is they don't know how to program anything. They don't know how to get actual adaptations from actual performance training. So they, by default, go to the burpee because it's quote unquote hard. So we're going to really kind of debunk that here. So now, before we actually jump in, let me ask you something. Think about the last time you did burpees. How did you feel during them? How did you feel after? And here's even the bigger question. Did anyone ever tell you exactly why you were doing them? Or did you just accept that they were good for you because everyone said so? See, here's what's fascinating about human nature. We often accept things as truth simply because they're repeated enough times. We see other people doing them and we think, oh, that must be good. Or, hey, those CrossFitters are really in shape and they're doing a buttload of burpees. Burpees must be why they're in such good shape. Burpees have become this almost mythical exercise hailed as ultimate full body movement, the king of calorie burners, the exercise that separates the fit from the unfit. But what happens when we actually examine the science? Let me tell you, what happens when we look at injury data, biomechanical analysis, and listen to what the medical experts and other fitness professionals, hint, not just me, actually are saying. That's exactly what we're going to do today in today's episode, and I'm excited to dive deep with you into that. So I've spent hours, and I really mean this. You're probably gonna think it's one of the most well put together podcast episodes I've ever done because I've done more research on something that I probably honestly should, if I'm being honest. Done a lot of research here to be able to make this episode ideally just the end all be all when it comes to burpees and having your information in a place that you can actually say, hey, look, somebody actually did the research. Somebody actually provided information. Somebody laid it out methodically. I hope I'm that guy for you here today. So I've spent hours diving into peer-reviewed research, injury surveillance, studies, expert opinions from sports medicine doctors, physical therapists, exercise physiologists. And what I found completely changed what I think people need to actually hear. Okay. And I think it's going to actually change yours too. I've had a pretty broad stance about this. I really didn't need all this research to kind of tell me. I kind of just used my brain and looked at the exercise and know how physiology works in terms of exercise science because I've done this for enough years, working with enough athletes, enough people. And guess what? There's never been a burpee in any of my training programs ever. So hope you're ready to sit down and enjoy this because we're going to dive in for about an hour on just the burpees. Might be a little boring for you, but use this as your, if you don't like the burpees, use this and pass it on to a friend. If you do like burpees, I'm sorry, I'm probably going to hurt your feelings. So let's start at the very beginning, but the origin of the burpee, because I don't think most people know this. And I think it's crucial understanding why we can kind of have this conversation today. So back in 1939, a graduate student named Royal Huddleston Burpee was working on his PhD in applied physiology at Columbia University. Dr. Burpee wasn't trying to create the world's most beloved or most hated exercise. He was simply just trying to design a quick fitness test that could assess someone's physical condition without needing a lot of equipment. I think he probably picked a good thing there from that perspective. But let's think about the context really quick at this time. This was just before World War II, and there was actually a need for a relatively simple, efficient way to evaluate physical fitness at a large scale. So Dr. Burpee, Think about that. His name is Dr. Burpee. Created what he called the Burpee test. And the crucial detail here is that everyone seems to forget on when he did this was that his original protocol called for exactly 4 repetitions performed slowly and with careful attention to technique and form. 4 repetitions. Think about that. 4. Not 40. 4. Not 4 minutes. 4 total repetitions was the test. That's all it was. But so let's talk about why the story gets really interesting. Is that here's where Dr. Burpee still it's got to make me crack up saying that a couple times, so I apologize. It's kind of funny. Becomes pretty much being a prophet. In his original research, he actually included specific warnings. He cautioned that people who weren't physically fit should not perform high repetitions of this movement. He specifically warned that individuals lacking core and trunk strength, he says core, I say trunk strength, could experience knee and back pain. So let's think about that. The creator of the burpee warned against high repetitions and specifically identified knee and back pain as potential consequences for people without adequate core strength. Now let's think about today. CrossFit, you walk into any fitness class, booty boot camp, CrossFit gym, even just a regular commercial gym. What do you see? People performing dozens and sometimes even hundreds of burpees in one go at maximum intensity, where they're exhausted, their form is complete ass, it's breaking down. It's the exact opposite of what was intended and contradicts his warnings. Okay, now he's a doctor, he's got his PhD, this is what he studied. Doesn't mean it's necessarily the end all be all of what he is claiming and doing, but I'm going to take the guy that quote unquote invented the exercise. Hell, it's in his last name. So if the person who invented this is giving us this warning, I think we should kind of heed it, right? So, I mean, a good way to think about this here is that if a person that invented the car said, don't drive faster than 25 miles an hour without a seatbelt or training or whatever, and then we decide to ignore that advice and start doing NASCAR races or driving as fast as we possibly can, there's probably going to be some issues, right? Now, this is just the historical context, okay? So clearly there's a fundamental disconnect between not only exercise's intended use, which is what he did for a simple 4 repetition test with minimal equipment with a large scale population, okay? But this exercise intended use is not how it's being applied today. And as we're going to find out through all the research I'm going to provide to you, that the modern research is validating what Dr. Burpee's original concerns were and should make us all reconsider the burpee if you're using it. And those that have been against the burpee, I think you're going to have more of a leg to stand on here. So now that we understand the disconnect between the burpee's original purpose from an academic side and what Dr. Burpee actually wanted to do with it, and now its current modern application, let's talk about some of the injury data and what we can gather from that. Because here's the thing about fitness trends. They persist based on tradition and marketing rather than research in more cases from a trend perspective. So what happens now when we actually look at the research numbers? So I've got some information here for you. So the most compelling evidence that I could find comes from a 2019 study conducted by the Mayo Clinic, and they're one of the most respected medical institutions in the world. So there you go. When they decide to study something that's an injury pattern, something they're seeing a lot of, probably worth listening to what the Mayo Clinic's at least going to say. So these researchers followed 100 participants through a 6-week high-intensity functional training program. Chances are it's probably CrossFit. They probably just couldn't call it that. They were looking specifically for burpee injuries. So they were tracking all injuries across various movements. Now, here's what they found. Burpees and squats emerged as the most common movements causing injury during the study period. In a controlled study environment with presumably proper instruction and supervision, 18% of the participants reported injuries during just 6 weeks of training, and burpees were identified as one of the primary culprits. But it gets even more concerning. The injuries weren't random, they followed a predictable pattern. The most common injury sites were the back and the knees. What did Dr. Burpee say? His original warning about back and knee pain was validating what he was saying and his concerns nearly 80 years after he came up with the exercise. So let's take a step back. Let's get a bigger picture here. Let's use some data from the National Electronic Injury Surveillance System, where researchers analyzed injury patterns from 2007 to 2016. What they found was pretty staggering. Nearly 4 million estimated injuries from high-intensity interval training exercises, including burpees, over that 10-year period. Think about it. 4 million estimated injuries from high-intensity interval training. Think about when CrossFit started. Okay. 4 million. Okay. The demographic data is particularly interesting because 58% were men, 39% were aged 20 to 39. So these aren't old people that we're talking about here, right? 20 to 39, those should be the peak years of your performance, your health, your longevity, being able to do the most and feel the best, still getting injured. Okay, so we're talking about young, fit adults doing exercise that they think is going to actually make them healthier. But here's where it gets really specific towards just burpees. So when researchers looked at CrossFit injury data, and CrossFit is probably the fitness modality most associated with high volume burpee use, right? This is kind of what we're kind of sending back to, is they found injury rates of 30.3% prevalence with 3.2 injuries per 1,000 training hours. So let's break that down into some practical perspective. If you're doing CrossFit workouts that include burpees, you have about a 1 in 3 chance of getting injured. And the most commonly injured areas, spine at almost 27%, shoulders at almost 26%, and the knees at almost 16%. So let's just take a second here and address something incredibly important. These aren't just minor aches and pains we're talking about. These are injuries significant enough to require medical attention or cause people to miss training time. We're talking about actual pain, actual dysfunction, real impact on people's quality of life. Okay, we're not talking about just it's kind of aches or here and there. It's clearly making a pretty noticeable difference in their life and a negative outcome. So here, for me personally, is what's pretty troubling. And many of these injuries could be prevented from people from exercising at all, right? Imagine if someone who gets excited about fitness, they get excited about taking care of their health, starts doing burpees because they've been told it's the quote unquote ultimate exercise. They get injured and then become afraid or don't want to exercise ever again. We might actually be driving people away from physical activity in the name of fitness because of a trend or because of a simple exercise that could just be completely abandoned. But because CrossFit, and I'm coming after CrossFit here, come at me, says that you need to do it because their programming is elite. So the question we need to ask ourselves, if an exercise is consistently associated with injury patterns that match the original creator's warning, okay, Dr. Burpee warned against this, and there's safer alternatives that we can provide similar benefits, hint, there are across multiple modalities and multiple training effects and adaptations that you're after, why is this still being promoted as the gold standard, the ultimate exercise, the ultimate body weight workout, what you should do in 10 minutes to be more fit? Okay. I don't know. The research is not there. So let's look at the biomechanical side of this. So we've established the injury patterns. Let's understand why this happens. So why are burpees causing these specific type of injuries? So to really kind of understand, we need to think about this from a biomechanical perspective. So I'm going to try to simple this down so that you can understand it as easy as possible and really analyze what's happening to your body when we actually do a burpee. So the most comprehensive biomechanical analysis of burpees was conducted using actually a 3D motion capture technology and force plates. Basically the same technology that we would use to analyze elite athletes and their movement if we're trying to get them ready for like Olympics or we're ironing things out, right? These are the best stuff that we can use to address some of these movements and analyze things. And what the researchers found is pretty eye-opening. If you don't want to hear this, it's probably not to those that have been against burpees, but explains exactly why we're seeing these injury patterns and why we're saying you shouldn't do them. So let's talk about first what actually happens during your body during the burpee, starting with the most vulnerable aspect, which is just the landing phase of the exercise. So when you jump back from the squat position and land in a plank, you're essentially throwing your body weight onto your hands and your feet. And the force analysis from these force plates revealed that your knees experience up to 3.5 times your body weight during this landing phase. So to put that in perspective, if you weigh 150 pounds, which I think is probably pretty light, that's what I weigh. That's what I'm using as an example. Your knees are taking over 500 pounds of force in a split second, just like that. And repeatedly. Over and over and over again. And so here's where it gets worse, that this maximum force occurs during the most vulnerable part of the movement when you're transitioning from explosive movement to a controlled position. So your muscles aren't prepared for this quick deceleration of movement. Your joints, your ligaments, your cartilage all have to take the grunt over the course of time. So let's think about it like this. Imagine you're jumping off a table and trying to land perfectly on your hands in a push-up position. Your wrists, elbows, shoulders are suddenly tasked with decelerating your whole body into the ground. And it's basically asking your body to be shock absorbers at all of those joints on the way down, and they're not designed for that, especially if you're not training for them to be designed for that. It's one thing if you built up training over time, your body can adapt to things like that, but nobody's trained to do that. So there's actually research done by Di Pietro and Di Puccio, I hope I'm saying that correctly, and this is in 2024, so last year. They found that during the explosive phase of the jump, participants generate approximately 20 watts per kilogram of body mass before takeoff. So that's a pretty considerable amount of power output that your body has to absorb somewhere during that landing phase. So let's talk about what your spine actually goes through now during the movement. We're talking about your knees and everything, your hands. So the burpee requires multiple rapid transitions from squatting to plank to push up to squat, squat to jump. Each time you make that transition, forces through your spine go through different positions under load. And if you know how to do these movements relatively well, how to hinge well, how to squat well, how to push up well, how to plank well, there's nothing wrong with these movements, especially if you're being deliberate and you're really thinking about what you're doing. They're actually really good movements. But the most problematic aspect is the transition from the chest to the ground position and then back to the squat position, because it's going to require excessive explosive spinal flexion. Essentially, you're rapidly landing on your back, you're rapidly rounding your back under load. If you've ever hurt your back lifting something, and I have, chances are for listening to this, you lift heavy stuff, you probably have at some point too. You know what rounding your spine underneath pressure feels like, right? You can subject your body to this over time with things like Jefferson curls and what have you, but they are something, again, you have to adapt your body to over time. So here's where that trunk strength that Dr. Burpee kind of identified as like an X factor for the exercise becomes pretty critical, because when your trunk is strong and fresh and it knows, you're doing methodical based movement, you can actually use it to help stabilize your spine during these positions and transitions like hinging and squatting and lunging and things like that, right? You know how to prepare your body for that. And you're not racing against the clock or just trying to do it as quickly as possible. But when you're fatigued, especially when you're fatigued, is exactly when burpees are typically performed in high volume workouts. So your trunk strength diminishes over time, and then your spine is left taking the grunt. So even if you want to do burpees and you want to do them pristine, you can probably make a case for them to some degree, I would still argue that you shouldn't. But if you do them like Dr. Burpee says, where you just do 4 of them, it's probably not going to accomplish a whole lot, right? You're trying to exercise. But most of the time, they're done in a fatigue state. And not only are they done in a fatigue state, they're doing with other exercises, also done in a fatigue state. So we're compounding issues here. Not trying to go after other exercises, but you can kind of see how the burpee can kind of get not only be problematic, but when it's done with other exercises, it's also excessively more problematic. So the EMG analysis side of it, which measures basically the muscle activation, shows something pretty interesting about the traditional burpee as well. And that's the chest to ground portion of the movement significantly increases activation in your anterior deltoids, your pectoralis muscles, but not in a way that provides meaningful training benefit. Okay. Yes, your shoulders and your chest are going to work because you're doing a push-up, right? However, they're usually pretty shitty push-ups, if I'm being honest. And that's why it's not providing any kind of meaningful training benefit, right? Just do freaking quality push-ups. It's just additional stress on the stabilizing musculature and structures without any corresponding strength gains whatsoever. Okay? So something to consider there as well is that I'm talking about the push pattern and the hinge pattern and the squat pattern. Great. But for most people, we're getting additional stress on joints without any kind of beneficial strength or hypertrophy gains. That's where there's a big question mark. But there's maybe even more concerning finding from the biomechanical analysis side of this is that the traditional burpee creates what researchers call joint stress rather than optimal muscle loading. That's a direct quote. In simple terms, this means the exercise is putting stress on your passive structures, your ligaments, your cartilage, your joint capsules, rather than effectively training your muscles, which you don't have to train your muscles. You can do things for conditioning and aerobic-based benefits, but you're literally putting the stress on your passive structures, as I mentioned, and you're not getting anything from a muscular perspective. And this is the opposite of what we want typically when we look at exercise. High-quality exercises should challenge muscles while protecting the joints, if at all costs, right? Burpees, based on this analysis from the biomechanical side, appear to actually do the opposite. There's little or to no muscular benefit with a lot of undue stress at the passive structures and the long-term wear and tear aspect that we would get from the exercise. So you might be thinking, but I feel like burpees give me a great workout. And you're probably not wrong. They definitely elevate your heart rate and make you sweat. But feeling challenged doesn't necessarily mean the exercise is biomechanically sound or safe in the long term. And as we like to say in the strength and conditioning and fitness performance world, any idiot can make another idiot tired. Really, that's really all it takes. I can make someone tired. Doesn't mean I'm good at my job. So the difference between doing burpees and quality conditioning is the fact that quality conditioning chases certain adaptations. And if we're just trying to make somebody tired, if you want to be tired, just go run until you can't run anymore. Okay? That's basically what you're doing with a burpee. You're physically getting nowhere. At least if you're running, you're covering some distance and you're going somewhere, maybe the gas station or Walmart or whatever, right? You're getting somewhere, at least for your efforts. You're getting nowhere with a burpee. Okay, so let's do a little bit of experiment here really quick. So think about if you've done burpees, okay, really consider these 3 specific questions. Number 1, when you do burpees, where do you typically feel it the most? You're feeling it in your muscles, your glutes, your quads, your lats, your chest, your shoulders? Or do you feel it in your joints? You feel it in your knees, your back, your shoulders, your wrists, right? Think about where you're feeling the exercise. Not that that always matters, but just think about where you feel the exercise. Number 2, think about your technique when you've done a burpee. Be honest with yourself here. Be honest about it. I can be too. I had to do burpees when I wrestled, okay? But I'm grown up. I'm 37 years old. I've studied the body. I've worked with hundreds of athletes and hundreds of clients, thousands of hours. Does your technique stay consistent from the very first rep you do to the very last rep that you do? Or does it get sloppy over time, underneath fatigue? You're not jumping back as far. You're not getting your chest all the way to the ground. You're landing harder than you should. Your push-ups start to look like butt, right? Number 3, have you wondered why burpees feel so much harder than other exercises that supposedly work the same muscle groups? Why does doing 20 burpees feel more exhausting than doing 20 squats, 20 push-ups, and 20 jumping jacks separately? Keep this in mind real quick, because we're going to connect everything we just talked about, those 3 points, and we're going to discuss kind of what you're getting out of here. You're probably thinking, if you're like me, I definitely feel burpees more on my joints than I do my muscles, right? Yes, my form definitely has broken down when I've done burpees, right? You're not alone. That was me. I wrestled. I did that crap. It's probably just somebody blindly telling you to do something and you followed it because they were the person that you were listening to. And that's where I'm challenging the fitness community as a whole to just ditch this exercise. And the people that defend it aren't ever the ones prescribing it. I'll tell you that. Okay. So let's actually go to some expert consensus here. So what are other professionals saying? People have called me out. I've got an ego. I don't like the exercise. I shouldn't call it useless. I don't have a very high IQ. Okay, that's fine. Let's see what other experts have to say, since I don't know what I'm talking about. These are people that have also, not just like myself, but who have also dedicated their careers to understanding human movement, injury prevention, exercise safety, strength and conditioning, right? They make living off of doing this stuff. Because when you start digging really down to what the real experts are saying about burpees, not fitness influencers, not your Instagram people, not your TikTokers, not marketing from CrossFit. We're talking about sports medicine doctors, certified strength conditioning specialists, like high-level strength conditioning specialists as well, movement experts. You're going to notice something pretty consistent. There's an emerging consensus that burpees may not be the miracle exercise that everybody thinks that they are. So first, we're going to start off with Mike Boyle. Some people love or hate Mike Boyle. I don't care what your opinion on Mike. Mike has pushed the field very far forward and has done a lot for strength and conditioning. Okay, he's seen it all. Okay, older individual. He's considered probably one of the most influential strength coaches in the world, right? He's trained professional athletes for decades, known for his evidence-based approach to his exercise selection. His assessment of burpees is very blunt and ambiguous. He calls them, and I quote, an inherently bad exercise. He explains his reasoning as, and again, I'm going to quote this, throwing yourself to the ground and immediately getting back up again is a really stupid idea. He specifically points to the excessive stress placed on the anterior shoulder, which we talked about, which he knows is the weakest part of the shoulder complex, and dangerous wrist extension that occurs under high force when you actually hit the ground. This isn't someone who's anti-exercise or promoting easy workouts, right? He's a coach who's worked with elite level athletes from all over the world, people whose bodies are their livelihood. They make their living with their bodies, especially that hockey population. He's really known for his hockey population. He says that the risk to benefit ratio of burpees simply does not make sense in his world. Okay, 2 other people, Ebenezer Samuel and David O'Neill, 2 other guys I also follow on Instagram, certified strength specialists. They also write for Men's Health. They're also equally direct in their criticism of the exercise. They say, and I'm quoting here, burpees offer virtually no athletic or functional purpose and can actually put you in harm's way. They specifically cite the high risk for wrist issues, shoulder issues, elbow injuries due to the deceleration forces when you hit the floor. But here's what's pretty important about their overall analysis. They point out that form breakdown is inevitable underneath fatigue. This isn't a matter of people just trying to need to go harder or focus more. The biomechanics of the movement combined with the typical high volume, high intensity application that we see make the technique deteriorate, a predictable outcome, not a personal attack, right? I'm not saying that you're sucking at burpees because you're not strong enough. You may not be strong enough, but I'm not even talking about people that are strong, are in good shape. Just the predictable motion of the exercise underneath fatigue is going to lead to bad movement patterns. So let's talk about some insights here from a physical therapist, Jim Witterstrom, who sees the clinical consequences of the burpees in his everyday practice. He documents specific conditions he regularly treats that he directly attributes to burpees. Some of the things he sees from burpees: disc bulges, herniations, facet joint irritation, nerve root compression, and repeated excessive lumbar flexion. He makes a crucial point that often gets overlooked in fitness discussions. He knows that people with pre-existing back conditions find burpees painful even with good technique. I've not done burpees in a long time. You know, if you've listened to any of my podcasts or know me personally, you know my issues with my low back from all my years of competing, okay? I understand that I took some risks doing some pretty ridiculous stuff back in the day lifting weights. Even he's saying that potentially for me, I could have back issues doing the exercise repeatedly over and over again, even though I have the ability to probably maintain a much better position than most because I'm already trained, right? So here's the catch. Many people don't know they have pre-existing conditions until they get injured. We know that imaging doesn't necessarily, you are not your image from an x-ray perspective. There's people that walk around every day that have disc herniations or bulges or maybe some kind of facet irritation. It's just so minor, they're not really getting any kind of symptoms at the moment. But all it takes is doing burpees to exacerbate an underlying problem that's just not been done underneath load in a fatigued state. And now they are aware that they have it. Where if they maybe did some quality movement patterns, some quality RDLs, some quality split squats, right? Quality trunk training, quality push-ups, quality pull-ups, chin-ups. Maybe they can still reap all the amazing benefits without aggravating those issues, right? So the pattern that emerges here from experts outside of the research side of it is that burpees create a perfect storm of problematic factors: high impact forces, rapid position changes, inevitable form breakdown under fatigue, and stress on the most vulnerable aspects of multiple joint systems. But the most telling expert opinion comes from someone we haven't mentioned yet, Dr. Royal Burpee himself, in his later years. So as he watched the burpee evolve into something completely different from his original intent, he became increasingly concerned about how it was being used. So interviews later in his life, he expressed dismay at seeing people perform hundreds of repetitions of exercise at maximum intensities. He reiterated his original warnings about the importance of trunk strength and proper technique. He emphasized that his exercise was never designed for high volume applications that now is clearly very popular. It's almost unprecedented in the fitness world to have the creator of an exercise actively warn against the popular use of their own creation, right? This would be like if somebody said, hey, I invented the treadmill, but don't use it for more than 5 minutes. It's only meant to be used for 5 minutes. And then people run it into the ground. That's not what happened, obviously, but just to give you a very similar one-to-one here. And I want to be clear. These are experts aren't saying that all high-intensity exercise is bad or that people shouldn't work hard or fitness should be quote-unquote easy. What they're saying is that there are much better ways to achieve the same goals without accepting the injury risks that burpees present. And that brings us to a fundamental principle of good exercise selection. The best exercises are those that provide maximum benefit with minimum risk. But experts across multiple disciplines are identifying an exercise as high risk with questionable benefits. We probably have a huge clue here of what we should probably do. All right. Now we need to talk about something that might be the most important factor in the burpee injury side, and it's rarely discussed in fitness classes, but it's pretty crucial to understand the relationship between fatigue and movement quality. So in most burpee situations, they're not performed fresh. They're not performed with perfect form or as a skill to practice. Instead, they're typically programmed at the end of workouts when people are already exhausted or they've already done a high volume circuit or they're implemented in another high volume circuit training where the goal is to maintain intensity even as form breaks down. The ultimate goal that they're training for is the intensity side. The quality and what you're doing is of little to no concern if the intensity is high. So research by Haynes and colleagues in 2022 give us precise data on what happens to movement quality underneath fatigue. They use the functional movement screen. Take it for what you will, but you gotta have something to test. We use the FMS on our facility to measure how people move before and after aerobic fatigue. So they basically use this as a pre and post test from a movement perspective after they were done. All right. They found that their functional movement scores decreased significantly, dropping from 45.1 points to 39.9 points after fatigue. So they saw a 10% decrease in the points. But here's probably the most crucial detail. The deterioration wasn't random. It specifically affected the shoulder and spinal movement patterns. The exact movement patterns that we've been talking about that have the most critical issues when it comes to doing burpees from an execution standpoint and the most vulnerable injury-wise when we're actually fatigued. So when you're fresh, you're focused, you might be able to maintain proper shoulder positioning as you transition from plank to push-up position. You might be able to keep your spine pretty neutral as you stand up from the bottom position, back up to standing, right? If you do these fresh and we take our time, we can probably do these pretty well. But as fatigue sets in, when you're going in running clock, you're trying to get as many reps as possible, you're competing against other people, you're not going to be able to maintain that and either compete or keep the intensity at the level that's being asked of you to coordinate all the complex movement patterns together, and everything's going to just diminish, right? That's what's going to happen. You have to make a sacrifice. You can keep everything pristine. The intensity is not to get there. And then now people are saying, well, it's not really that hard because if I take my time, I do one push-up, take my time, stand up, hinge properly, do a quality vertical jump, squat down, walk my feet out, do a push-up, right? If we do that controlled, that intensity is not there. I think that's why people love the exercise. It's the intensity side, the way they feel while they do it. So instead of using proper muscle sequences to protect you as you're doing this, when you're fatigued, your body starts compensating using whatever position and pathway that you can get the objective done as quickly as possible. So you're going to, again, rely on your passive structures, ligaments, joints, tendons, to be able to take the grunt, when ideally you would be using proper movement patterns. So something to consider there is that everything that you're doing here is going to diminish underneath the fatigue. And that's what happens when you take complex movement patterns and you just throw them blindly at people and you throw time constraints and intensity constraints and just try to get stuff done and not actually work on quality movement. And here's where, in my opinion, where it gets pretty problematic with burpees specifically. Okay. So Dr. Burpee warned about the initial trunk strength issues. But research shows that trunk stabilization becomes impossible under fatigue. And it said impossible. Your deep abdominal muscles, your spinal stabilizers, your pelvic floor, your diaphragm, these are all things that work together to protect your spine during dynamic movement to be able to create a nice stacked position. And ideally, that's what we want to have. Everyone's going to be a little bit different, but those muscles work together to keep you stacked. And when you're rigid and you're stacked, and be able to maintain proper intra-abdominal pressure, that's how you protect your spine over heavy loading or even really bad movement patterns, assuming that your tissues have been subjected to these over time. But those muscles in the midsection are usually the first to fatigue because they're the hardest to consciously control when you're exhausted. You're taking big breaths and you're really tired. You're inhaling, you're exhaling, you're extended, right? You're compressed, right? You use all these muscles to not only maintain your trunk position and twist and rotate and do all the things, but they also aid our breathing patterns. And so when you're breathing really hard, you're using them even more. So when you're exhausted, it gets kicked up even a notch further. So here we have a situation where exercise that requires precise and ideal neuromuscular control, strong trunk stabilization is typically being performed, or we're asking people to perform them, where these requirements are nearly impossible to meet within the intensity ranges that we're asking them to do. The research on neuromuscular fatigue specifically shows that the type of fatigue induced by high intensity, high volume exercise, exactly the conditions which burpees are typically done, specifically impairs precise motor control needed for safe burpee execution. Right? You're not going to be able to have precise control when you're exhausted and you're pushing intensities high, and that's what's being pushed as important. So people often interpret this breakdown as a good thing. Think about it. People are like high-fiving when they trip over bars and eat it over boxes and look like they're flopping like a fish. Because the thought process is, I'm pushing myself to my absolute limits. I have to be getting better. I have to be losing weight. I have to be burning calories. I got to be stronger. I have to be better if I'm putting in this kind of effort. But usually what's happening is they're training their nervous system to bad movement patterns, dysfunctional movement patterns, and they're banging their passive structures up, all up to just burn a couple calories. And this creates a problematic learning effect, especially from the outside looking in, right? You post this stuff on social media, you see these in boot camps, people just absolutely looking demolished and crushed by doing burpees. And really, it's getting people nowhere at the end of the day. Your brain is learning to associate high intensity exercise with poor movement quality. And then you're going to build compensatory movement patterns. They can be habitual, not only affecting just burpees in general, not that I care about that, but if you do bad burpees, you're more likely to do bad burpees, right? We are neurologically based. The more repeatedly do something, the more we ingrain that pattern. But then the movement quality and other activities begin to suck. Your push-ups begin to suck. Your squats begin to suck. Your planks begin to suck. So we now have that sports science research is pretty clear that practicing the movements with bad technique underneath fatigue does not make you more resilient. It actually makes you more likely to get injured. It can actually decrease your performance in other activities because, again, you're building bad movement patterns. This is why high-quality coaches and trainers focus on maintaining movement quality and limiting fatigue and teetering fatigue in a spot and learning to shut things down appropriately when they need to. And why they're always increasingly questioning exercises that are pushing intensity over their technique. Because we know what the inroad has. We know that now we can train 1 to 2 reps shy of failure from a strength and conditioning side and still see the benefits from hypertrophy and strength. We don't have to train to maximum failure, especially on the technical side. We know the motor learning says that if we want to increase our back squat or our front squat or our bench press or our deadlift, we're probably better off leaving a little in the tank and maintaining our technique and ingraining that pattern perfectly or damn near perfectly versus throwing an extra 20 pounds on and having it look like absolute shit. We know we'll see better return on investment from the weight that's 20 pounds less versus the one that's 20 pounds too heavy. That's just the way training works, the way the nervous system is going to work long term. The burpee is no different. You're just doing it 1,000 times more because there is no load underneath the exercise. So let's talk about who's at risk and populations that should avoid the burpees. Let me tell you something really quick. I think everyone should avoid it, if I'm being honest. But let's kind of take an objective look here. Let's talk about the fact that not every exercise is appropriate for every person. Burpees clearly carry risks for everyone, but there's a specific population whose risks become even more concerning. Kind of coming at CrossFit here because they literally would just throw people into stuff. First, to kind of start off first with pregnant women. This is one that's kind of thought about, but Medical guidance seems pretty clear here, even though it's often ignored in the fitness settings. American College of Gynecologists have specific guidelines about high impact exercises during pregnancy, and burpees present multiple concerns. First, there's a jumping component. I don't think there's anything wrong with jumping if you were jumping pre-pregnancy and you're jumping during pregnancy. Obviously, how the jumps are being done and how you're landing and your pelvic floor strength is all going to be individualistic. But as the pregnancy progresses, jumping motions clearly increase more pressure on the pelvic floor, which is already underneath extra stress that we know of from carrying that extra weight. Secondly, the chest to ground position creates obviously risk for the baby of abdominal trauma. So we don't want to do that. And then pregnancy can affect balance and coordination because we're going to have an anterior load that a woman is not used to having typically. Maybe if she's had a pregnancy, she is a little bit, but there's a lot going on in 9 months, right? From a body perspective. And so their balance coordination could definitely make these even more challenging. So many fitness classes don't provide adequate modifications for pregnant women. And they assume that if someone can physically perform the movement, then it's okay. And this isn't true. That's not the way things work when it comes to working with pregnant or even postpartum women. The fact that you can do something doesn't necessarily mean that you should do something, that particular activity. Burpee would be, in this case, one of them. You're going to need to make modifications along the way for this specific population. The other one would be adults that are over 50 also represent a really big high-risk population. I hate to throw a number on it, but this is kind of just what the research is saying. That's the age that they used. So clearly as we age, we experience what's called sarcopenia, age-related muscle loss. If you've been training for a long time, you're less likely to have this, but that population also generally sees decreased bone density, slower recovery times, changes in joint mobility and stability over time. All these clearly factor into injury risks and makes high impact, high force nature of burpees incredibly problematic, especially if we're talking about people that have not exercised in a long time. So the research shows that adults over 50 have exponentially increased injury risk with high impact exercises, especially if they have not been doing them in the past. Their bodies simply can't absorb and recover from these forces, as we discussed from the landing side, throwing our body to the ground. And when injuries do occur, they typically take longer to heal and recover from because of the age. The other people that should be cautious are individuals with cardiovascular conditions are obviously going to face a different but equally serious set of risks. Burpees can cause rapid, extreme elevations in heart rate more rapidly than cardiovascular system can adapt safely. So people with conditions like that have recently had infarctions, unstable angina, heart failure, these sudden heart rate spikes can be very dangerous or even life-threatening for these populations. The intensity is too much, too hard, too fast. That's kind of my saying. Most issues in strength training come from doing something too much, too hard, too fast, too soon, right? All the twos. But here is probably an area of people that's pretty overlooked, and that's people with existing musculoskeletal issues affecting their back, hips, shoulders, or wrists. So people that have prior injury history. This includes things like disc injuries, rotator cuff problems, wrist or arm fractures, hip impingements, patellofemoral knee pain, previous knee injuries or ACL tears, surgeries, any kind of like previous knee issue. Excuse me, we'll kind of lump those together. For these people, burpees can exacerbate these existing problems or pre-existing problems that they've had in the past, or create new injuries and more compensation patterns because they're compensating to do the exercise to work around an issue that they've had in the past. So they're making a compensatory movement on top of a compensatory movement. So there are multiple ways to compensate for this. So the challenge is that many people don't realize they have these underlying issues until they get injured. So you might have, a little bit of a hip mobility issue on one side that don't really cause you problems, but then once you get underneath the high force, rapid movement demands of doing burpees, these restrictions become injury triggers because you start compensating. And therefore you're using your right knee a little more. So your right knee's taking more of the bang. or your right Achilles, or your right hip, or your right low back, right? You're just building those up through repetitive poor movement patterns over time. There's also the psychological piece that we need to discuss, and people that are new to exercise or returning to exercise after long breaks see burpees as like a badge of honor. Like, yeah, I'm back in it. I'm going to do this. I'm going to make progress. This exercise is going to shred me up. I'm going to lose 10 pounds. It's almost like a way to like prove your commitment to the fitness community. Hint, we don't give a shit about your burpees, just so you know. We don't care. I don't like seeing them on social media, but us as fitness professionals, we really don't care. Your friends probably don't really care that much either. They're going to be proud to support you in your journey to improve your health. They probably don't care that you're doing burpees. But these are the people that are probably at the most risk of seeing issues because they haven't developed the proper movement patterns, the trunk strength, the body awareness to be able to actually do the movement properly, slow, steady, if you're going to do it. So we might be people, so what we might actually be doing as a fitness community is driving people away from exercise entirely because someone who's excited about getting back into shape jumps into a fitness program. They got a dumbass trainer giving 100 burpees as part of their workout to get back in shape. They get injured doing those burpees, and then they become I'd say afraid of physical activity, but they've got to go to PT. They got to do this. They don't know how to work around it. The trainer's like, oh, we'll just modify your burpees. We'll do your burpees on a box versus doing them on the ground, right? You're still going to do burpees. So we're potentially creating a negative association with exercise in general, at the exact moment that we could actually be winning somebody into a very healthy lifestyle, very long-term, with something that's very sustainable. Very sustainable. There's tons of options here that we can do outside of the burpee. So the medical consensus is pretty clear to me that these high-risk populations obviously have the potential harm significantly outweighs them seeing any potential benefit. Like I think if you are anybody in these particular populations, new, elderly, pregnant, previous injury history, burpees should not even be a question in your training program, in my opinion. There is zero benefits. There is way too much that can go wrong. And there's ways that we can work around those special populations to get them equally similar results, if not better results, with methodical, laid out programming and training. So the question becomes not can you do burpees, but why would you choose to do a burpee, right? We know there's better things that we can do. So that segues me into better alternatives. Let's get similar benefits, maybe even better benefits at a decreased risk. So what should we do instead? This is, in my opinion, where the conversation gets pretty exciting because if you're educated and you understand strength conditioning methods and principles as a professional, this is a pretty easy answer. If you are not, this is where you really probably want to like turn the volume up, bust out a piece of paper and take some notes because I'm going to make you probably a better trainer or coach really quickly because now when somebody asks you, why don't we do burpees? You not only have an exercise or exercises that you can provide, you can actually adjust your training programs for specific populations as well as keep them healthy and keep them showing up. And if they're paying you, that's also kind of important, right? So there's a number of exercises that we can do to provide the same or a similar cardiovascular stimulus with, guess what? Strength benefits without the kind of injury risks that we've talked about. So the first one I'm going to talk about here is going to be kettlebell swings. So I would say it's probably one of the best alternative to burpees that's out there, in particular the Russian kettlebell swing, not the American one, which again, CrossFit has ruined. It's just the kettlebell swing, in my opinion. The one that goes overhead is also a waste of time. I'm not going to dive deep into that today, but you're going to get a very comparable metabolic demand. You're going to get your heart rate up just as much as you do burpees, but you're actually going to build a quality hip hinge pattern that actually teaches good movement mechanics. You're going to do it with a heavy load, and they're not going to be compromised as long as you know how to hinge. So yes, you may need to teach someone how to do an RDL or a band pull through to get their hinge pattern technique locked in, maybe for a couple of weeks. But I assure you, once you teach somebody how to hinge, lots and lots of exercises really open up. The kettlebell swing being one. Kettlebell swings done for conditioning are absolutely brutal. They're one of my go-tos in all of my conditioning programming that I do for myself and for others. I love the kettlebell swing. So it's not only that, but it's going to work your posterior chain, so your glutes, your hamstrings, and your low back in a static position, right? You're still going to have to hinge, but you're going to maintain that position. The offset of the kettlebell will let you do that much easier. You're not having to get up and down off the floor. So it's going to develop those with a strength, which are usually an underdeveloped aspect of people too. So unlike burpees, which aren't going to develop that, they're going to bang up on your joints. Kettlebell swings will actually improve your hip mobility and teach you how to generate power and improve your mobility and actually build some muscle if you do them heavy enough. Okay. Another one that I'm not super passionate about, but depends on how you do them, is going to be bear crawls. Okay. They look simple, but they're pretty effective for building full body strength and coordination while remaining pretty joint friendly. So they challenge your trunk stability. They improve your shoulder health, especially if you're doing reverse bear crawls. Talk about a super underrated exercise for shoulder health. Reverse bear crawls. And build, quote unquote, functional strength that actually transfers to real world activities. We all learn to crawl at some point. Everybody's crawling time goes out the window. I don't know why, but it does. But you're actually going to get your shoulders moving in quality ranges of motion. Your hips are going to move in quality ranges of motion. As long as you keep your back relatively flat, keep your pelvis underneath you, butt's not up in the air, butt's not sagging underneath. Again, it's where technique is important. But guess what? There's no crazy hard impact demands. You're just moving your hands forward, backwards, side to side. You can go all kinds of directions. Lots of options here. Personally, I like side to side and reverse bear crawls, but regular bear crawls are also great. Use them for many of our athletes as part of their just traditional warm-up. So what you're going to find pretty interesting here is that they're actually more specific. Both those two things are more specific to real-world applications than any burpee ever could be. Just those two movements alone. We start adding in, say, a landmine thruster, another exercise I absolutely love for conditioning. One, we can build that squat pattern. We can build an overhead press pattern. It's going to be out in front. But the nice thing is we're actually going to get our scapula to come around our rib cage. We're still getting that pressing pattern. We're going to have an anterior load, making it easier to sit into our squat, to be able to hit 90 degrees, to have a better squat pattern. We can do it cyclical in nature where we can do several reps repeatedly without having to stop. When you do need to stop, you can just drop the weight, especially if you got a bumper on there. You're not going to hurt anything. Catch your breath, you pick it back up, and you go again, right? If your arms get tired, you can just continue to squat and you continue to tax your lower body. But again, you'll be able to maintain a nice posture because you've got that anterior load and that landmine to somewhat lean into, right? It's just a much better exercise that's going to get you a lot of the same benefits. You can do a lot of the same stuff, and it's pretty scalable. You can go from the bar all the way up to adding 50 kilos on there if you really want to, right? So you can push that pretty hard. So you just got to think about what you're doing. And people say, oh, well, the burpee is functional. When in real life do you ever throw yourself onto the ground and immediately jump back up? But you are going to have to lift something heavy off the ground, like a kettlebell, to do a kettlebell swing, or you're going to have to crawl underneath something or move around or maintain your stability while you're actually doing like a squat. Have something in front of you, you have to squat down with like a landmine thruster, right? Those are all pretty realistic movement patterns that you're probably going to see a lot more frequently than getting up and down off the floor. Maybe if you're on the ground, you got to get up and get away from, say, like a bear. I guess that would work. So the alternatives that I've provided here teach quality movement skills that are going to do a lot more for you in the long run. And you can actually get cardiovascular benefits. You can actually get strength benefits. You might even get some hypertrophy from them if you actually want to kind of train in those ranges and give yourself some rest, right? You're looking for a bang for your buck. That's what you're going to get from these. So even if you do want to stay with burpee-like movement patterns, there's much safer modifications that you can wait. So let's talk about what you can do from a burpee perspective. If you want to try to keep them, what would I do? So I would eliminate the jumping aspect entirely, right? I would also use, so when like the jumping over the top, just ignore it. You're not getting a high effort output from it, right? You're just doing a half-ass jump. Don't worry about that. If that's what you want to do, just jump rope. You'll get better Achilles tendon or better Achilles adaptations than you would just doing what you're doing from a burpee perspective. The jumping back portion of it, what I would do is not jump back, actually step back into that movement. And that's going to reduce the impact. You can stop at an actual plank position rather than going all the way down chest to the ground, right? You can just basically get down into a plank. And then you can actually push yourself back up into a good squat position and stand up from your squat position. Or you could just do squats, push-ups, lunges, jump rope. You can do all those things as well, and you'll get a lot of the same training benefits. Yes, you have to break each one of them up, but guess what? You can do 20 seconds of squats, rest 20 seconds, 20 seconds of push-ups, rest 20 seconds, 20 seconds of alternating lunges, rest 20 seconds, 20 seconds of jump rope, rest 60 seconds, and repeat that. Right? That's a way to easily break things up, control work rest intervals. You know what your adaptation is going to be. You're going to be able to take rest. You have a built-in minute every single time to kind of catch your breath, gather yourself, and you can go again and go again and go again and go again. You get actual aerobic benefits. And if you're really pushing the squats, really want to, you can put a dumbbell there. Same thing with the lunges. If you're really good at push-ups, you can elevate your feet. If you're not good at push-ups, you can elevate your hands, right? You find a way to modify the exercise very simply for you and your current level, and you can get all the benefits from a cardiovascular side, if not better, and you can actually build some muscle, especially if you are inexperienced. If you are experienced, find something else to do. Just go get on a bike or do landmine thrusters, right? Push heavy sleds. You'll get all that and much more. All right. So the key principle here is what most exercise professionals call risk-benefit analysis, right? For any exercise, we got to ask ourselves, what are the benefits this exercise provides? What are the risks? And are there alternatives that provide similar benefits with lower risk? That's the name of the game of strength and conditioning in the health and fitness world. How can I get the highest return on my investment with minimal injury risk? That's all athletic strength and conditioning sports performance really genuinely is. High ROI, minimal risk. That's how the best guys keep their jobs. They get a lot out of the guys they have. They get a high return on the exercise that they're doing. That's why they use a lot of data. They use data to drive their decisions from their programming and their analysis. Sprint mechanics, change direction mechanics, force production, all that stuff is being driven down to science now. So we don't have to guess on what to do. We have the science tell us this is what this athlete needs to do. Even for the average Joe Schmo, same kind of thing. Big bang for your buck stuff with minimal risk. That's what's going to give you the best long-term solution from any kind of fitness performance aspect. So when we apply this analysis to burpees versus other alternatives that I've mentioned, the alternatives consistently come out way ahead. They provide similar or even better training adaptations with significantly lower injury risk. All right, let's wrap this up. So I want you to leave here today with some key takeaways that you can actually use in your fitness journey. That's what my podcast is all about. It's just giving you something you can actually take away from every single episode that you have here with me. So first, let's just remember that Dr. Burpee himself initially warned against the use of high volume applications that have become popular today with the burpee. When the creator of this exercise specifically cautions us against how it should be used, that should give us a serious oh shit moment, right? Secondly, The injury data is consistent and it's concerning. There's multiple studies from reputable institutions that have identified burpees as a significant injury risk with predictable patterns of back and knee problems that match Dr. Burpee's original warnings. Thirdly, the biomechanical analysis side explains exactly why these injuries occur. Burpees create joint stress rather than optimal muscle loading, placing forces on passive structures that are not designed to handle them repeatedly for long durations of time over and over and over again. Fourth, other experts in the field consensusly across multiple disciplines remarkably are unified in questioning burpees' risk to benefit ratio. They're not necessarily anti-exercise voices, right? These are professionals who are dedicating their careers and have their livelihoods based on helping others and making them not only move better, stay healthy, and improve their performance. But the most important takeaway is you don't need burpees to get fit. That's the underlying thing. You don't need them. Maybe me saying they're useless was a far reach, but I'll still stand by the fact that I said it, and I do think that for the most part, they are useless. If I have absolutely nothing and literally this fraction of a space to move, then maybe that's what I have to do, but that's never going to happen. Okay? There are numerous alternatives that provide same benefits, if not better, without all the risks. The goal of exercise and training, improving your health, should be to make you healthier and more capable, not to increase your risk of injury. So if you're currently doing burpees and haven't had problems, it doesn't mean that you're not going to have them. Injury risks compound over time, long-term wear and tear, especially with an exercise like the burpee, where your technique breakdown underneath fatigue is inevitable with an exercise like this. So consider this your opportunity to make a proactive change rather than a reactive one. I never see anybody get injured in the weight room doing strength conditioning stuff. That's the last thing I want to see. And so if you haven't got hurt, count your blessings. Use this as your warning now. So if you're a fitness professional like myself, you really need to consider whether you're actually including burpees in your programming, because are they truly the best option? Or are you choosing them because they're quote unquote hard, they're traditional, quote unquote traditional, I'll say quote unquote there. You're just trying to make people feel like they worked hard. Are there better ways that you can get your clients to feel like they worked incredibly hard, got their asses handed to them, while actually helping them achieve their goals while decreasing their injury risks? I assure you, there are. There are. If you're someone who's been intimidated by burpees, or you felt like you were failing because you didn't do them well, or whatever, you were kind of on the fence, I hope in today's episode I've shown you some of the problems that they have, why I don't like them. It could just be the exercise itself that's total butt. It could be the way that you're doing them. Doesn't really matter. Hopefully I'm giving you justifications of why you should just ditch it and not even worry about it to begin with. But the most thing we need to remember here is that the best exercise training program is the one that you can do consistently without getting injured. Movements that make you stronger, help you build muscle, improve your conditioning, improve your mobility and movement patterns, not ones that are going to put you at risk at losing those. Now, as a powerlifter, I've fully done some pretty heavy shit. I've torn my hip and back up over the course of time, chasing all-time world records. Sometimes you're going to make those decisions, right? Had I known what I know now, if I was said, hey, your body's going to feel like this, I would really question about what I did. Looking back, I'm glad I did the things that I did. I did some pretty extraordinary stuff in my days of powerlifting. I'm very proud of that, because I never thought it would have happened. If you would have talked to me when I was at Purdue and you'd say, hey, in the next 6 years, you're going to break an all-time world record, I would not have believed it. But hindsight being 2020, I still know there's things I could have did during my training that I know now that I try to help other lifters do to stay healthy, right? I'm using my firsthand experience from getting injured to help prevent others from getting injured, or to make the best opportunities of their training now while they can. And that's also what I'm trying to do from the perspective here with burpees, right? I did them when I wrestled, but I've not done them really ever since, because I've not really ever agreed with them. as I began to get into the field. So again, if you are a competitive CrossFitter and you have to do the exercise, then that's just the card that you've chosen to draw. You're going to have to do the exercise. But guess what? Doesn't mean you have to train them. If your conditioning's good and your upper body strength's good and your lower body strength's good and your trunk strength's good, you break apart the parts, you strengthen up the parts when you need to do the movement pattern, you should be good as long as you understand what you should be doing and you understand the risk versus reward, right? Is it actually worth it? So something worth considering. So I thank you to end this episode for joining me on the deep dive. Probably, I've not checked the internet, but I'm going to guess this is probably the deepest dive podcast episode on burpees that you'll ever find. From diving into the science side to arguably the fitness community's most controversial exercise in the burpee. So I appreciate you joining me for today's episode. If you happen to like this, you're watching over on YouTube, do me a favor, hit that like button. If you like the episode, leave me a comment. That helps me out as well. And if you're not subscribed to the channel, make sure you hit the subscribe button. Completely free, costs you absolutely nothing, keeps you up to date with more episodes dropping and all my other content, from exercise index stuff to educational stuff to more podcast episodes like this and everything in between. If you're listening over on Spotify, Apple iTunes, wherever you enjoy your podcasts, I really appreciate it if you leave me a 5-star rating if you like the episode or the podcast just in general. It helps other people find it. If you know somebody that's doing burpees or you're against the burpee world or whatever, feel free to share the episode. If you want to call me a jackass and say that I'm an idiot for hating on the burpees, feel free to share the episode as well and leave me comments and all that kind of great stuff. I've kind of defended the burpee enough. I think I've got my supporting evidence here to back me up. It's not just myself. But I'm also always open to having conversations as well with anybody and everybody that's actually willing to have a civil conversation. So appreciate you joining today for today's episode over on burpees. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you at the next episode.